I'm Emily and welcome to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and thank you for joining me for another podcast episode. So today I have two finished objects to share. One of them is not with me, it was a gift knit, so it's already with its recipient, but I have a few things that I wanted to talk about, so I thought I would share it anyway and put in some photos that I have of the finished sweater. I also have two works in progress, both of which are really fun, engaging knits that I have been enjoying working on, so I'm looking forward to sharing those as well. So we'll start off with finished object number one, and it has been shown on the podcast as a finished object before, but not in its final form, and that is my home cardigan by Caidree. So the home cardigan is a drop shoulder cardigan construction that is knit at a worsted gauge, and the pattern does have 1x1 rib, but as you can see I've changed that to 2x2 ribbing for my version. So in the last episode and the one before, I think it was a work in progress / almost finished object, and I spoke about a lot how much I didn't like the colour of the yarn. As you can see, it's no longer that colour. It used to be a really odd cream, yellow, greenish, off-white, white colour that I was really struggling to style, and it just didn't look very nice on my skin tone. So the yarn that I've used is the Heirloom Merino Magic 10-ply, and it is a 100% superwash merino, but it is also quite scratchy. When I had it knit into a sweater originally, I just wouldn't wear the sweater because I didn't like the colour, and it was just a really odd scratchy feeling, but it was also really hot, and I just didn't really like the overall look of the sweater either. So I finally frogged that sweater and knit it into a cardigan instead. I thought having an outer layer piece with a scratchy yarn wouldn't be so bad because I'm most likely wearing a t-shirt or something underneath it that won't be against the most sensitive parts of my skin. In hindsight, I probably should have dyed the yarn before putting in all the effort to knit a cardigan and then dyeing the cardigan. That was a little bit risky, but to be honest, the cardigan didn't take very long to knit because it is quite a loose gauge compared to what I'm usually knitting. It did go by fairly quickly, and it was a very fun knit anyway. Let me see if I can show off the colour of the cardigan a bit better. I do see why hand dyers call them tonals now instead of solid yarns, because it's really hard to get a really even colour on a 100% superwash base. I thought it would be perfect for dyeing with a commercial dye, and it did turn out really well. But there are some variations in the colour, especially in the button band. You can see the edge where I've done the Italian bind off is a little bit lighter than the rest, even though I left it in there for probably the maximum amount of time that was recommended. It just didn't pick up the dye so evenly. I can also see here where I've picked up some stitches for the sleeve. It's not as even as the rest of the cardigan. Saying that though, it's not something that bothers me. It does just look like a hand-dyed cardigan because it is a hand-dyed cardigan. I have already worn it a couple of times. It's been quite warm here, even though it's technically autumn. We're still having 32, 34, 35 degree days, so I haven't been able to wear it a huge amount, but I'm looking forward to the cooler weather so I can start wearing some of my woolly knits a little bit more. I was also unsure about the buttons on this. I kept the brown coconut buttons that I had on there originally, and I think I prefer how they looked on the lighter base, but to be honest, I don't have anything else in stash that would look good with the brown or be the right size. These are a little bit too small for the buttonholes, but this does have enough positive ease that when I'm wearing it, there's no strain on the buttons, so I don't think they'll come undone. And to be honest, I only really wear cardigans unbuttoned anyway, unless I'm really cold, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. If I do find something in the future that looks a bit better, perhaps I'll swap them out. But let's be honest, I'm probably too lazy for that, and now they're on there, unless I need them for another project, they're probably just gonna stay on there. So I don't have too much more to discuss on this one. I just wanted to share that I finally did it, I dyed it, and it does look a lot better and fits into my wardrobe much better than the weird cream yellow green colour did. My next finished object is the one that I don't have here with me, so it's a bit weird to talk about something that I can't physically show, but I'll put in some photos that I've taken of it anyway, and that is my Lanox sweater. So the Lanox sweater is an all-over half fisherman's rib quarter zip sweater designed by Rebecca, also known as the Creabea, and it's something that I knit for my sister for her birthday. She wears quarter zip sweaters quite a lot, and she did ask if I could make her one, and then when I sent her a photo of the Lanox, she said yes, that's exactly what she wanted. I did think about doing the Petite knit zipper sweater or zipper sweater light, but I've knit a couple of those before and I was looking forward to trying something a bit different. I also really like Rebecca's pattern writing style. I've knit quite a few of her patterns and I find them really easy to follow. They're thorough enough that you have all the information you need, but it's not an information overload that you're sifting through lots of information to find the details that you need. I really wanted to use a tweed yarn for the construction and the stitch as well. I thought that tweed yarn would look really good with the half fisherman's rib and also with this overall design, and I think it looks really nice. Most importantly, my sister fell in love with it when she saw it. She was really excited, so it was good to get that reaction from her, and I know she appreciates and understands how much work went into it. But saying that, I thoroughly enjoyed this knit. It was so much fun. It's not super often that I will get really stuck into a project like that and only knit monogamously on one thing, but it was just so difficult to put down. Once I was in the rhythm of a half fisherman's rib, I really struggled to work on anything else, and that's why I don't have a huge amount of projects to share, because I just put all of my knitting time into that one project. The construction was really fun. It was so engaging. It wasn't something I had done before, and it did make me think a little bit, and I did have to be quite careful in making sure that I was following each step correctly. And also with a new stitch pattern, I'd never done half fisherman's rib, so I just took my time to make sure that the patterns were all matching up, and I finally finished it. The construction starts off with the collar, quite similar to the Petite knit zipper sweater and probably all of the zipper sweater patterns out there. So you start off with the collar and then you do the shaping for the shoulders. This one is a drop shoulder construction versus the Petite knit zipper sweater is a raglan, and I have to say I think the drop shoulder was a lot more fun and it didn't seem to go by so slowly. I just find that raglans, especially the zipper sweater, for some reason goes by so slowly it feels like I'm never going to finish the yoke. I had no dramas with the rest of the yoke construction, and then I joined in the round and the body, and I think I said previously I started off a few rounds working in the round and realized that my tension of the stitch was not looking the same as it did flat. I was also just not enjoying working it in the round, to be honest. There was too much purling and I couldn't get into the same rhythm. So I just decided to work the front and the back pieces separately in panels and then seamed it up at the end. I did the same for the sleeve, and I think I'd picked up one sleeve in the last episode, so I just picked up the number of stitches and then cast on the stitches on the end and then just worked the sleeve flat and then seamed it up at the end just like the body. You might be able to see in the photo of it hanging that the structure is quite drapey. There is some alpaca in the drop soft tweed, which I probably should have considered a bit more before deciding on using that yarn, but it is quite soft, and to be honest, it's not a big deal. I think the seaming helps add a little bit more structure in the sides where it's needed. I made my sister the second size, I think. She has a slightly bigger bust circumference than I do, and when I tried it on myself, I was a little bit nervous that it was going to be a little bit too big, because she did say she didn't want too much positive ease, but when she tried it on, it fit her perfectly and I was so relieved. I did think that I might have to go back and shorten the body or the sleeves a little bit. She said she also didn't want it to be too long, and she has slightly shorter arms than I do, but overall it fit her perfectly. Putting in the zipper was also no dramas. I think having done a couple of the zipper sweaters before, I knew what worked for me and what didn't, and I don't mind doing hand sewing. And by the time I'd seamed up all of the side and the sleeve seams, a bit more sewing was nothing, and it was probably a bit easier than doing the seaming in the half fisherman's rib. So now that that one is off the needles and is with its recipient, I do still want to make one for myself. I had always intended to make one for myself as well. I did purchase a sweater's quantity of the same yarn in a different colour to make one for me, and I do still want to do that. I'm probably not ready to cast it on just yet. I only just finished that one a couple of weeks ago, and I've been enjoying doing some other techniques in my sweaters instead. So probably when I finish the current sweater I have on my needles, I might go back and cast on another one as well. So that's a wrap on my finished objects. Let's move on to my works in progress. And the first work in progress that I want to share is the Mudo socks by the Petite knitter. So as you can see, I have almost finished the first sock. I do still need to add in the heel, but I only just finished the toe this afternoon after what's felt like forever. I think these have been on the needles for quite a long time, and I have just been neglecting them, to be honest. I've been working on the Lanox sweater and also the other sweater that I have that I'll show off in a second, and these are just taking a back burner. I have been working on them here and there. Sometimes during my lunch break I will pull them out, but then that's only getting maybe 15-20 minutes of work on every day. So they're just slow going. Saying that, I am really enjoying working on them, and I'm looking forward to having them finished when we finally get some cooler weather as well. I am knitting these in the recommended yarn, which is the Biches Bûches Petite Lambswool in this cream colour, and then the medium grey brown as well. And yeah, I'm quite happy with my colour choice. I'm knitting these as part of a very small knit along with a few friends, and someone else is using the same colours but started off with opposite main colour, because you do swap your main and your contrast colour for the second sock. So it was really fun today to be able to see what the finished pair would look like. I do really like the contrast cast on. I think that's a really fun detail that I might start adding into some other socks. I'm kind of wishing I did slightly longer ribbing. I did just do the ribbing that is recommended in the pattern. I did add a little bit of length into the leg. You can see that's how long my leg will be, and then obviously the foot you just knit to your foot length anyway. So in hindsight, I might have wanted to add a slightly longer leg and definitely longer ribbing, but they're fairly snug, so I don't think having a short ribbing will be an issue. It would just be more of an aesthetic thing rather than functionality. So I'm knitting these socks on magic loop using 2.25mm needles, and for these Colorwork socks I am just knitting both the main colour and the contrast colour English style, and then just picking up and dropping each colour as I need it. I have last year been experimenting with knitting Colorwork. It's something that I've been really getting into a lot more and having a lot of fun with, but I have been playing around with different techniques for Colorwork. I've knit some socks with both colours in my left hand, and whilst that does work okay, my tension did get really tight, and I just felt like it wasn't the most comfortable way for knitting Colorwork. I've then tried a few projects with two-handed Colorwork, and I found also that I had tension issues because my English style Colorwork can be a lot tighter than my continental style, so it just leaves some weird bumps, and the floats are really tight in places and loose in others. So I've just decided that Colorwork is something that will be a very slow and mindful activity instead, and I'll just be knitting English style and then dropping and picking up each colour. It does also mean when I have to catch floats that I have to stop and like put down both colours and then move the balls around to stop them getting tangled. But again, it's just something that I've accepted. A Colorwork project for me will be nice and slow going, and go into the project thinking that it will take a while rather than thinking that I can just smash out a pair of socks in a couple of weeks like I usually could if they were just plain vanilla socks. I probably say this about every Petite knitter sock pattern that I make, is that, oh, I really want to make the matching sweater to go with it now. I did it for the Sasky socks, and now I'm thinking about the Mudo socks. I'm thinking, oh, it's a really easy Colorwork repeat. It's very easy for me to memorize the chart, and it would look really good to have a matching sweater, but I'm not sure if I need to do that. If I was going to make one, I'd probably pick the Sasky sweater, but I'll show off my Colorwork sweater that I have going at the moment and see how I feel about doing another Colorwork sweater after this one is done. So that brings us nicely into work in progress number 2, which is my Daisy sweater by Solvara Knitwear. I think Solvara Knitwear is a relatively new designer. They're at least very new to me. I saw the finished sweater, the pattern release on Instagram, and that's how I discovered the designer, and I knew that I had to make this sweater this year. So I'm knitting this in the recommended yarn, which is Isager Tvinni, and I could only really order this locally-ish from Sunspun, which is an Australian yarn store, but they're not based over here. I think they're in Melbourne. When I had a look online, I picked out the colours that I wanted, and I definitely wanted this white, off-white as the main colour, but they didn't have it in stock at the time, so I was on the wait list for probably 2 or 3 months. I've kind of forgotten about it until they called me and said that it was in stock and if I still wanted it. So I said yes, definitely, and then picked my contrast colour. I think in the last episode I had received the original yarn, definitely the white, and the original contrast colour that I chose. When it arrived, it was very purple and it definitely wasn't what I thought it was going to be. What I did want was this bright pink colour, and just the photos made the original colour that I ordered look more pink, but they were very helpful on the phone. When I called them to explain that I wanted to swap it, I did say I want a pink, and is this colour more pink, and like a hot pink is what I really wanted. So it was good to be able to call them and they could do the shopping for me. I did have to pay for postage to post the original 2 skeins back, and then postage again to get the 2 skeins back to me. So that cost $20 on top of the yarn, which wasn't the cheapest yarn that I've ever bought for a sweater. But saying that, it definitely was worth it. I think this colour is exactly the vision that I had in mind. Here is where I am up to so far. As you can see, the yoke is completed now, and I have split the sleeves, and I've done maybe about 1 inch or so on the body. It's such a fun knit, and it was really challenging for me to get started. I have never knit an all-over Colorwork sweater like this before, with a chart that was repeating across the whole sweater basically. And it was something I knew going into that I was probably going to have a few hiccups about and would need to rip it out and start again a couple of times. So it was helpful going into the project knowing, okay, I'm probably going to have to rip this out, but just get started and treat the first attempt basically as a bigger gauge swatch. I did gauge swatch for this as well, and did have to go down a needle size actually. So I'm working this on 3.5mm needles instead of 4mm needles. So it is a big commitment to be doing all over Colorwork with finger and weight yarn on 3.5mm needles. But as I've said before, I think this is something I'll get a lot of wear out of. Having a big chunky Colorwork sweater with all the floats behind, creating extra fabric, is not something that I will get a lot of wear of where I live. So this is a good compromise to get a really beautiful sweater, but also something very practical. So I'll talk about some of the main challenges that I had with this sweater, and the first one was where to put the chart basically into the sweater. There are also short rows in the back which are also with the chart. So it was a lot going on, to be honest, because I was working the chart and following along with the chart, not really knowing where to put each flower, like where to start the chart basically, on the raglan section. And then I was doing short rows, so I was working back and forth doing Colorwork, which I'd never done before. And on top of that, the technique used for short rows is Japanese short rows, which I'd never done before. So there was a lot going on. I also found the Japanese short rows was quite difficult to pick up and memorize. I kept having to refer back to the tutorial I was looking at online on how to do the short rows. I'm sure now that I've done them a few times, I could probably pick it up a little bit quicker, but being my first time and putting stitches on hold and then dropping them and then having to pick them up and manipulate them in a certain way, I found it just a lot for my brain to handle. But I'm really glad that I pushed through and persevered and got to this point. I knew that I wanted the finished sweater and I knew that it would be worth it, so I forced myself to keep going, and it was really frustrating at times, but I think it will all be worth it in the end. So in terms of the placement of the chart, I think for some people this is probably something that just clicks in their head and makes sense and they just automatically know where to put things, but for some reason I really struggled to work out where to begin the chart for each section. So obviously it is a raglan, so there's basically 4 sections of chart that have different repeats going on at different times. So you have something going on at the front and the back, and then also for the sleeves. So I really struggled to think about where to start the chart, especially considering there was the short rows. I didn't know if the front would start the chart in an awkward place and cut off a little bit weird, like it would be a half a flower, and I definitely wanted to be like a full flower on the front. So as you can see on the back, we like start off here with the half one, and then it goes into the full repeats, which I think looks good anyway, and I'm quite happy with how that worked out. And then also on the sleeves, there's just a full repeat here, and then a half one up here. So essentially the start of the chart is with the half flower, and then it worked out for my size, I'm not sure if that's all sizes, that by the time you finish the short rows and you're actually working all of the front stitches here, that you just do the 2 big flowers here. I hope that makes sense. It really took a lot for my head to get wrap around the pattern and what it was saying. There wasn't a lot of guidance in telling you where to start the chart or where to place each section, like the chart in each section. It does say that it's an advanced pattern, so I think if you have some experience in that before, it might just make more sense, and I definitely knew going into it that I would probably struggle with that. I did find it helpful to have a look on Solvara's Instagram highlights as well, and I had a look at her version as well, and there was some really helpful photos of it, of the yoke laid flat, and you could see where each chart was placed as well, so I did find that helpful. And essentially what I did in the end is that I knew I wanted each part to be centered, so I just put a stitch marker for the center of each section and then counted the stitches from there where I was up to in the chart. There was also a section at the start of the pattern describing how to ensure the chart lines up in the round when you get to the body. This only applies for some sizes, but it did apply for the size I'm working, which is the second size, which is the extra small size, I think. This does have also a really good size range. So anyway, going back to the pattern, there was a description on shifting the pattern to make sure that it matched up in the round, and now I understand what they were saying, but at the time I had absolutely no clue what that meant. And essentially you could offset the back to make sure that when you joined in the round, the stitches matched up. So as you could see before in the back, I just centered the pattern because I didn't really know what else to do. And yeah, when I got to the underarm, I was a little bit annoyed at myself because I thought I'd have to rip back everything and start again. But when I read the pattern closer, I did have to put this aside for a few days, to be honest. I was that annoyed at myself that I just completely ruined this whole sweater and wasted basically a whole week of knitting. But I did read the pattern closer, and there were instructions on basically how to account for this. I think if I was to knit this again or something similar, I would now shift the back, so I would have the back off center and then make sure everything matched up in the round. But to be honest, it's not a big deal. It still looks really good. Essentially, you just add in some extra stitches on the side here that are just in the main color, so you're spacing out these two a little bit further because you do cast on stitches at the underarm, and I think it will look okay. To be honest, it's just on the side, so it's not the most visible part, and at least the back is centered, the motifs are centered in the back, and it's the same on both sides, so it's not going to look weird. I think if one side continued nicely in the round and the other side didn't, then it would look a little bit weird and that would annoy me. But considering they're both symmetrical and they'll be the same, I don't think it would be a big deal in the end. Even though I do really like how this looks already at the moment, I will also be adding some duplicate stitching at the end. This is what the pattern recommends. I did think that it was originally going to be 3-color colorwork at some point, and I was a little bit relieved when I realized it was just duplicate stitch. I think I probably would have just done that anyway, just to avoid having that extra challenge on top of what I knew would be a challenging project, but that is what's recommended in the pattern anyway. So I will probably get some bright yellow yarn. I think that's what I have my mind set on. That's my vision, is that there'll be bright yellow in the center of the flowers. I didn't order the Yellow Tvinni yarn, which I think is what Solvara used in her versions, and I could have ordered another skein, but it's not, as I said, it's not the most affordable yarn, so I thought just ordering one skein to use a tiny bit and then not knowing what to do with the rest because it is an obnoxiously bright yellow color. I thought I should have a look and see if there's something a little bit more affordable or in a smaller quantity like maybe a 25-gram ball that I could purchase instead. So I'm yet to do that, but that's the vision, is that we'll have bright yellow centers in the daisy, and I'm so excited to see how it looks. I think I will have to go to my local yarn store in the next couple of weeks so I can start having a look at options for that, and then potentially even start adding in the yellow now, just to give myself that extra motivation when I'm getting through the body. I do find the body of sweaters to be the most tedious, and it does drag on a little bit, especially if there's no shaping or anything. Sleeves I don't mind doing, especially tapered sleeves where you're putting in stitch markers or you're counting between every decrease, and they just seem to go by a lot quicker. A body of a sweater just seems to drag on forever. Saying that though, because it is Colourwork, it's really addictive, and I find it really hard to put down because I don't want to lose track of where I am at the chart, and I just want to keep going. It's really hard to stop. Apart from the pattern not really holding your hand on where to place the chart for the colourwork for each section in the raglan, I have found it really easy to follow. It also in the chart tells you where to catch floats, which is something I haven't seen before, but I do think it is quite necessary for this pattern. So yeah, it is nice that you are told where to put your floats. I think if you stack where you're catching your floats for this design, it would just give some really weird lines that wouldn't look so good, and it would be really visible to see the contrast colour through the main colour. Obviously you still can, but I think that's part of the fun of the design. So I think the toughest part of this sweater is out of the way now. I have finally finished the yoke. It is a raglan, and it did feel like it took forever. It is a nice compound raglan though, so I do think that the fit of it is a lot nicer than a regular raglan, because it does come down in a nice curve at the bottom of the arms before you split for sleeves, so I'm not left with lots of excess fabric here. I don't have a huge amount of positive ease in this one, but that's fine. I also haven't blocked it yet, so I think when I do block it, it will bloom very nicely and probably gain a little bit more positive ease. Saying that though, even if it just stays like this, I'll be perfectly happy with that. So I'm glad that the toughest part is out of the way now, and I can enjoy working the colourwork in the round, and hopefully I don't get sick of that anytime soon, but if I do, then I might go and find the yellow yarn and then start adding in the centres just to break up the body of the sweater a little bit. So this is the main project I've been working on, and the only other work in progress that I have. I also don't have any acquisitions unless you count the pink yarn with something new that I had added in for this sweater. But I'm just enjoying working on this so much. It's really engaging. I'm really in my colourwork era at the moment. I see how people get really hooked on to doing colourwork sweaters, and I think doing something fingering weight like this is a lot more appropriate for the climate that I live in. I don't have any plans to cast anything on at the moment. I think I'm just enjoying working on the projects that I have at the moment. If I do get sick of doing colourwork, I will cast on something else, maybe just a plain stockinette sweater, or I have a few sweaters quantities in my stash that I'm itching to cast on, but I just want to wait until the right moment. For now, I am really enjoying doing colourwork, so we'll stick with that until I get sick of it enough to get something else on the needles as well. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks so much for watching this episode. Bye!